Welcome to the age of smart iron. Is this, when you think of Caterpillar, is that what you think? Smart iron? Yes. That's who we are. And that's where we're going. So it's always fun to start with that little video. That's not what I think. When I think of Caterpillar, I think of cat hats. I think of boots. I think of mining. I don't think of smart iron. So it's part of what we're here to talk about today. Where are we today? Where are we going? How do we get there? Why it's important. So at Caterpillar, sustainability is one of our values. And Tim Lindsay, who's in the room today, was my predecessor, and he was very involved in that. So we always give him a lot of credit. And our chairman, our former chairman and CEO, Doug Oberhelman, was very passionate about sustainability. And as we looked at that as a company, as Louise said, sustainability is something that we have done for decades. And we're a very humble company, and we're the kind of Midwest folks. That's where we began, sort of keep your head down, do the work. And so this idea of building equipment to be rebuilt is something we've done from the 20s. We didn't know it was circular economy. We didn't know remanufacturing and rebuild was sustainable. But we knew it was good for business, we knew it was good for our customers, and we knew it was good for our company. And so when you look at sustainability, it's embedded. It's part of our core, and it always has been.
So I actually joined in December of last year, after 10 and a half years in the NGO sector in DC. So worked at the Pew Center on Global Climate Change, which later became the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, or C2ES. And there I directed Business Environmental Leadership Council, which was 30 Fortune 500 companies engaging on climate and energy. And I've been doing that obviously a long time, and while very fulfilling, at the same time, those of you who work on policy know that even when things are going relatively well, it can be hard to judge the progress you're making. It can feel like a bit pushing on a string. It's just kind of the gauge of the string that you're pushing on. Worked through the days of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership back in 2009-10, coalition of NGOs and companies that were working to get a national cap-and-trade system. Obviously, we didn't get that. And then up through and beyond Paris. And my first UN climate conference was actually in Copenhagen, which, as you all know, became sort of Copenhagen. We struggled our way back to Paris, and actually got much more in Paris than we expected as an NGO community. And then, of course, we just had the announcement last week. So, and I'm actually quite proud that as an international, our parent company signed on, as some others in the room did, to an open letter that was released yesterday supporting Paris and saying that, as a company, we still think this is critical.
As I said, stakeholder activism in the age of Trump and the implications for companies. I think, needless to say, the election of Trump, I think, changed people's perspective a bit on what the future is going to look like. And I think it really was a call to action for many. people already mentioned that earlier in the day. Mary Ellen said that. And I already talked about what Future 500 does, but I think the need for what we do is arguably greater now than ever. We depolarize discourse between parties at odds, try to humanize those parties so that they can get together and roll up their sleeves to find solutions to various challenges. We work at the intersection, building trust between these stakeholders, and our organizational integrity is really what allows us to be in the middle for all sides. So what are the trends that have basically gotten us up to the election of Donald Trump, and what's going to, I think, change, and what is changing since he's been elected in terms of stakeholder activism targeting the corporate sector? Post 11/8/16, the election of Donald Trump, there's doubling down that's going to be happening. This is mine. I like blackjack, so that's why I put that up there. There's really a doubling down, but the money's going to be deployed in different ways. It's going to be 1,000 fires, but I think there's going to be a lot more money on litigation, for example. We have heard anecdotally that this is the greatest influx of funding into the environmental movement and social movements to a degree since the election of Ronald Reagan. We had one mainstream NGO tell us that in November, after he was elected, they raised more money in November than they had the previous 10 months. But it's different. Some groups actually, because so many people invested in the election, are seeing a reduction in their funding. But I think net, it's going up pretty significantly and pretty quickly.
So the afternoon, and Gord, I thought you did a great job introducing this topic of advisory councils. I really like this. We should have a slide made of this. People were taking photos. It's really good. The question for me, though, and I'd like to just explore all four of these as I talk about our advisory council and what led to it, as Kathy mentioned. But this whole create the future concept, I think the big question is, how do we all arrive there at about the same time? You know, and that's what you have to do inside a company. And that's one of my big learnings. I've been at this for about 7 years now. And the learning for me is, how do you get everyone to arrive at the same place at roughly the same time? There's a lot of layers in a company, especially the global companies represented in this room, and I work with practitioners almost at every table. I was looking for the back of the room. I'm working with many of you. And I think we're all asking that question. You know, we see some of us are really good at the grassroots level, maybe at the shop room floor. Some of us are really good with the executive, the C-suite level. Some of us are really good with maybe our own teams, and we go team to team to team. And if you're driving home like I do sometimes and you're wondering, okay, we've made it through 9 teams, there's just 99 more to go. You know, it could be a really taxing drive home. So the way you integrate in a company like ours is you must impact the current processes and policies inside the company. It's not very helpful to develop some new initiative or policy over here that's not well connected or embedded, integrated in existing processes. So the council has helped really push us on that one strongly from the very beginning.
So I'm going to talk a little bit today about establishing an external stakeholder advisory council. That's the agenda. So I'm going to give you an overview of Walgreens Boots Alliance. So that's kind of our big parent company. And I'm going to go into an overview of Walgreens, because when I talk about establishing an external advisory council, it's at least in the immediate future going to be focused on that Walgreens piece of the business. So it's important to understand how Walgreens interacts with WBA and how we work within that framework. Go through a little bit of our CSR strategy, our global commitments, so talk a little bit about the SDGs, our current stakeholder engagement. We actually do have an external advisory council, but it's for a specific piece of our business, so I'll explain that. And then our concept of critical friends. I'm going to talk about our future stakeholder engagement, which is the external advisory council we want to set up. And then I really want to get your input. So I want to thank Bruce so much for giving me this platform today, because I'm really looking for input and feedback from all of you, as this is not something we've yet done. This doesn't exist for us yet. So I want to hear all of your experiences and just feedback on what it is we're planning on doing.
It's a British phrase, critical friends, that we've first heard from Richard Ellis 3 years ago. Scott, would you view any of the people that you have on your panel as a friend, or do you view them in a different way? Because it's friends mean so much different, you know, having studied in UK culture than in American culture. I mean, in American culture, a friend might be someone you walk a dog with, but don't really share critical business information with. Would you view yours as critical friends, or do you think of it differently?
Well, we had no ties to any of ours from day one. Now, since then, things have evolved. For instance, Terry Yossi, who's the CEO of World Environment Center, we now do projects with World Environment Center, but we had no linkage to anyone prior to the formation of the council.
I do think it's interesting, Scott, when we were looking at that breakdown of that slide that shows what your external advisory council does, the one thing that you do not have them do is advocate for you externally. Walgreens doesn't currently do that either, but Boots has a long history of working with their critical friends to help with that in that space. So
it takes a very different vetting.
Yeah.
Right. And critical friends, they want them to be a magnifier throughout content, right, as opposed to an internal change agent. So that's the nuance I wanted to try and bring out.
Is that like saying friendly criticism?
Yes, that's kind of exactly what it is. So they're really looking for these partners to challenge them. But again, within the context of what their business is, what their objectives are, and what they can achieve.
Before I knew anything about the merger of what we were doing with DuPont, and we did not have a vision. Our vision had been through 2015. And so employees were asking, you know, what is our vision? What can we tell our family, our friends, our colleagues? And understandably now, you know, in the first part of this year, Pierre and his executive team were very reluctant to come up with, you know, a vision and agree that we should have one. But I convinced them, I said, we need this for employees. They need to have something they can say and, you know, feel, you know, why they work for this company. Employees are very loyal. So we worked through this. It's only a 2 to 3 year vision, as you see there. It's pretty short term, but given our circumstances right now, it seemed appropriate. And then you'll see there the guiding principles that are listed to achieve the vision. So the third one there, recruit and develop an exceptional and diverse workforce. You know, some other presentations today have talked about diversity and inclusion. So a year ago, last December, we appointed a global diversity and inclusion officer for the corporation. So we're in our infancy of getting this off the ground and trying to set meaningful goals and targets that we can talk about publicly. Right now, they're, in my mind anyway, they're pretty loose, and if anybody tells anybody that, and see I said that, I'll deny it, but they're loose. So trying to get the executives to agree to something that's specific and measurable and actionable is a struggle right now.
But it really is on this multi-capital approach that we heard about in the video. And we're looking at 6 capitals: financial capital, manufactured capital, intellectual capital, human capital, social and relationship capital, and natural capital, the 6 capitals. And the descriptions are here on the slide. I won't get into the detail of them. They're pretty obvious of what they are. And the capitals, I think, can really be broken down into 3 different categories. The first 2, financial and manufactured, and these are high-level general statements, not specific facts, and you can disagree with me on these, but when we talk about our financial reporting today and the Financial Accounting Standards Board and international standards, it's really concentrated at a heavy amount on financial and manufactured capital. There is recognition of these other capitals, but nowhere near to the emphasis of financial and manufactured capital. So that's kind of the reporting that we have today, the focus that's done by the standard setters and the Securities and Exchange Commission. And unfortunately, because of that focus, maybe the way companies think about their managing their business, and maybe the issues of short-termism we have is based on that concept of focusing on financial and manufactured. What I really want to report on is a finding from McKinsey about, and kind of Jack a little bit to what you were indicating, of just facts, depending on even how you do the study, that long-term focus is much more profitable. And so these are mind-boggling numbers to me, and this is from 2001 to 2014. Companies they identified during their criteria, which is pretty robust criteria of long-term focused companies, increased their revenue percent by 47% and their earnings by 36%. So you're talking about a 10-15 year time period here, and that's, I think, what we really need to look at instead of looking at 1 quarter or 2 quarters or 1 year. And there's really statistics out there. You can see from 7 to 14 is that R&D spending grew at an annualized rate of 8% versus 3.7% for other companies. So these companies did better. They spent more on R&D, which is expensed under the accounting rules, so everything else being equal, will put you at a disadvantage in quarterly earnings. But they're showing on longer-term performance. And really, the value of a company should be the long-term discounted cash flows back to the present. That's in essence what it is, and that's what should be looked at. And so we should be looking at the long-term. And of course, you got more discounting going on, but you got to look over that time period. And this took that into account, discounting. And then what they came to the conclusion is that the United States would have generated at least 5 million more jobs, an additional 1 trillion in GDP growth, which is just phenomenal if people were thinking about long-term. So I think that's what's important from this study, is that there's actually facts out there, and keep this discussion and movement, is that we got to get out of this treadmill. And I think that's just our discussion of working against that.
So, Ceres and WWF are environmental NGOs. I think Ceres, people probably know pretty well, works at the intersection of the corporate and investment worlds, and does a lot of work to help sort of identify how environmental and especially environmental issues, but increasingly sustainability issues more broadly affect companies and investors. But they've been active in the corporate and investment space for some time. WWF, interesting, an organization that's all about protecting wildlife, wilderness, ecology. What are they doing on an issue like this? They really understand that to address and protect the areas they want to protect the species they want to protect, you have to address issues like climate change. And CDP, of course, you all know, but an organization that has really become the central storage place for information for investors about corporate action on climate change. And so these organizations together wanted to highlight the progress companies are making, encourage more progress in the context of the really broad set of issues that Mike just addressed in terms of what we need to do to manage climate issues, but what is happening already in the progress that we're making. Would certainly obviously encourage companies to set company-wide targets and to use science-based targets. And I know one challenge that you might hear, or one concern you might hear, is how are we going to get there from now to 2050, or how do we get there in the longer term?
It's a really interesting group, like Mike Eckhart said, and it's not often you go to these things and you see this kind of quality of communication. So Bruce asked me to talk to you about green bonds, but he also suggested that I might tell you a little bit about the European Investment Bank, which I guess isn't going to be a household name to you in the same way perhaps as the World Bank is, but for reasons I'm going to tell you about, it should be. So that's a slightly self-indulgent plug on my part. So we are a public institution. We belong to the EU member states, currently 28, soon to be 27, thanks to the lunatics that left in charge of the United Kingdom. We are big. We have a balance sheet of some 580 billion euros.
We lend annually around 80 billion, 85 billion euros, about 450 investment projects a year, and we're active right around the globe, with the exception of the non-European OECD countries, and with the exception of a couple of the obvious pariah states. Do you get a better yield? No, not at the moment. Maybe one day, but so long as we're only measuring these returns financially, that's going to be the case. But once, as you know, I think these guys are amongst the more enlightened of the institutional investment community. Once you start taking into account carbon footprint and impact, these calculations look very different. And you know, the return, the risk return equation looks very much in favour of green investments. And this train is leaving the station. It has already left the station. Regulator in France is already requiring investors to do this. I think other regulators will follow. That's one of the items under consideration by the FSB, the Financial Stability Board. So I think this is going to be a very fast-moving train.
When I'm able to come to the AHC meetings, it seems like I still get interrupted by inputs to the real world. It's one of the few times in the whole year that I get to think big thoughts, and that I get to find out what other people are doing, see what that might mean to my company or not to my company. And some of the best presentations I've ever seen, well, I would say the best presentations I've ever seen have been at AHC group meetings. So I've seen a lot. And there was an economist back almost 10 years ago that came in, one of the best presentations, literally maybe the best presentation I've ever seen. And then if you just look around all this stuff happening, the thing I like about it, and it's word that for these meetings maybe got used more frequently in the past, and is, I believe, true and speaks to why there's maybe a different tone and a more openness here, is that it's a smaller group of businesses, and I think Bruce has cultivated the word I like, or the word I've heard used that I like, is sanctuary. So you can share, I think you can share stories here, and it doesn't have to be what's the public front. There's a trust level, I think, in these rooms from Dwight and the people who put together the sessions, that it's at least something that's what I follow. So I'll try and tell you at least what it's like, or what it was like for me, and it's kind of let the chips fall where they may. And in the spirit of sanctuary, I love having the opportunity to talk about this case study. Interestingly, two of the most meaningful endeavors in my professional life that I've been involved in are actually, I'm going to use the term, failures. And so I'm actually going to talk about something that didn't succeed today. Doesn't mean the process wasn't right, doesn't mean that there weren't things that we did right, it just means that it didn't have the intended outcome of what we wanted to achieve when we first started the project.
This whole session is about risk. And frankly, I think risk gets a bad rap, right? Everybody thinks risk is bad. Well, not all risk is bad, right? If you don't have risk, you don't have reward. So if you're trying to grow an organization, you have to balance positive risk with negative risk. We have to take a risk if we're to try to get a reward. So on the project, what we're doing, we're in the middle of doing it, is to take a well-established risk management framework, not change it, not add more reporting, not create a new standard, but simply add to it how to detail the methods, approaches, and methodologies for integrating sustainability-related risks into the enterprise risk management function. I love these two slides. It's art and science. So the science piece first, really, everybody loves data, and when you're talking about the financial aspects, and look, there's a lot of CPAs involved with COSO, so decision trees, Monte Carlo analysis, and forecasting. We love that stuff. it's of course important. You want some validity behind what you're doing. But there's the art piece as well, right? Understanding risk, that gut feeling, and that's what chief executives and CFOs and other people in strategy development and execution have to be able to go with. And we're talking about decision making in this century or in this decade now being a little bit more distributed, letting people, strengthen global, empower local. That's one of the pillars of our company, which basically says you will do the right thing for clients when you're on the ground. You should know what the right thing to do is. And a lot of this is this art piece. So the intuition and acumen, personal and business-based acumen, being able to say, these are the risks that impact us, here's an opportunity, let's go ahead and exploit that, or let's quantify that.
Well, I just want to thank everyone here for providing the space and opportunity to share with you sort of what I've been up to. Yes, my career in sustainability started when I was a Girl Scout, and I really did spend a lot of time in the woods. And so how my career evolved from that is that from there I went and started making little Barbie doll clothes and ended up going into a very, very successful career as a fashion design consultant, which probably would have continued on in perpetuity had I not had to move my design studio from point A to point B, an atypical activity in the life of a human being and in the life of a business. So being half Cuban, half Italian, and able to go into a snit faster than any Ferrari, I was livid the very next day in 1991 as I'm standing in front of the incinerator, incinerating thousands of dollars of cardboard boxes, which went over budget because I used them to move my precious designer pencils from Italy 6 blocks. And then I destroyed the life of a tree for that. And so I felt literally like a tree cremator and just went into my snit, my Latina rant about how somebody ought to have a business where you could rent reusable plastic boxes as an ecological alternative to cardboard. Now that's the equation that transformed the market. Because we could go 5 high instead of 3 high. We immediately reduced the number of truckloads, stacks, elevator trips, and move labor required to do a Tiger box move. So we got to create a sustainable outcome by providing an economic advantage. And so when companies would reduce the cost of a $200,000 move down to $140,000 because they made a single change in the specific box compared to cardboard, they rented our Tiger box. It was compelling to the point where it was irresistible. One of the things I want to say, though, as a sustainability leader, reuse was replacing consumables. I was in love with that. So we wanted to expand our footprint across the entire country. There was only one problem. We were working with third-party service providers, utilizing their warehouses, and they were keeping track of our inventory on the Excel spreadsheet. So you can already see how unscalable that model is, because the idea of honor reporting as to how much is being used was really porous at best. And so, not being willing to take no for an answer, because most entrepreneurs don't, I'm no exception, I decided this is the opportunity for us to create a tracking system where we can eliminate the human and the possibility of mistakes in reporting across the entire supply chain.